Okay, let's talk about earthing. My first experience with earthing was actually living in Hawaii, noticing that every time I would go into the ocean for 10 to 15 minutes, if I had a headache, it would be gone. If I had any other aches, it would be gone for probably a day or two afterwards. So making me feel really good after getting out of the ocean. Um, then I discovered that earthing is a thing. Picked up this book, um, read through a bit of it, and thought, hey, you know what? This actually all makes sense. So about a month or two ago, I made my first earthing device. Only costed me about $2 in total. I just picked up this plug head from Home Depot. I had some extra solid core 12 gauge copper wire laying around. And I designed this so that I could plug it into the outlet underneath my desk and stick my bare feet on it and earth while I'm working at the computer. I ended up ripping out the negative and the hot terminals out of this because I just didn't want the inside of the socket to be electrified and have any chance of, transmitting EMFs to my ground here. So this was my first device I made, and recently I just finished making another earthing setup. And what I did was I took a 6-foot steel rod, about 3/8 inch, picked it up at Lowe's. I'm sure Home Depot would have it too. It was only $6. So I drove that in outside. We're in the basement. So I drove it in to the window well over here, all 6 feet down to the level of the gravel. Now the gravel is about 2 feet thick for drainage purposes, so we have a good 4 feet of the rod in the actual earth below the gravel in this basement window well. And then I also bought about 20 feet of solid core 12 gauge ground wire. If I was to do it again, I'd probably get 14 gauge. 12 gauge was a little thick and kind of hard to work with. But I took that wire, I soldered it to the end of my ground rod out there, and then I ran it through a little water drainage port here that's just in the bottom of most windows. There will be a little drainage hole. That way any water that gets in your window here will leak out. So I've got that running down, and I connected it to some speaker wire, which I connected to this little copper bracelet. I made one for me, one for my wife. This is the same wire here. And I just shoved it into the end of this speaker wire. And the speaker wire I like a lot. Sorry, having a hard time focusing there. The speaker wire I like a lot just because it's really supple. And we wear this around our ankles at night, and it's a way to be grounded at night while you sleep without spending $80 on one of those ground sheets, those earthing sheets. So this is what we do. It's a lot cheaper. I think it works just as good. You don't have to worry about washing a special sheet. So the speaker wire I didn't buy, I just found it out in the garage. And then I also picked up an analog multimeter for testing purposes. So let's talk about the second reason for this video. The first reason is to show you guys a cheap setup that you can do to be earthed while you sleep, without having to buy an $80 grounding sheet. Part of this was just for fun, because I like messing around with electrical components. So let's do a little test. Second part of this video, the purpose is to show that if you can, it's much better to be earthed in the ground than to your house's ground in the electrical socket. And let me show you what I mean. So, give me 10 seconds here. Apologize, my video editing skills are not great. So I'm not great at editing things out. Okay, we're back. I've got the negative terminal here connected to the nighttime ankle bracelet, which is connected to the earth outside. And now we have my original homemade grounding setup, which is connected to the outlet ground system. All right, so let's do a little experiment. I'm going to show you 3 things here. The first is AC voltage. So from the house's ground, which should be perfectly grounded, to my ground, which is my rod stuck in the earth. All right, let's connect it, see what we get. Okay. Connected, disconnected. Connected, disconnected. So you can see we're getting a little bit of AC voltage there in the house's ground system. Probably just because it's a bunch of wires basically acting as an antenna and picking up EMFs there. So now let's test it on DC voltage. Got it down to the lowest setting, about 2.5. So you can see we've got some DC voltage in the house's ground system. That's interesting. And lastly, we're going to set it to amps, 10 amps. And let's see how much amperage we have running through the house's ground. Okay, looks like we've got about 3 whole amps of DC current running through the electrical ground of the house. Now, this is an older house. It was built in the 80s. But this just goes to show, the moral of the story is, if you can, it's best to connect to the earth itself rather than just plugging it into your socket and trusting that that ground is good enough. Now, is this better than nothing? Probably yes, especially if you're on the second story or in a high-rise apartment building. But if you can, I would definitely recommend earthing to the earth to avoid any extra currents or voltage that's going to be picked up by your house's wiring system. So feel free to leave me some comments. I'm not an electrical engineer, so this isn't doctrine. I may have misread some of this. And let me know what you guys think. Happy grounding.